What's going on, guys? Aldrin Estacio here with FlytPath.com. Now in this video, I'm here in Carmel Valley, San Diego, California. I'm here at the pump track, and what I want to do is do a little test with the PolarPro filters. This is for the new DJI Osmo Action. Just want to show you some of the effects and the differences of using an ND filter as well as not using an ND filter. So make sure you guys stay tuned. And PolarPro is coming out with a new Vivid Collection PolarPro set for the new DJI Osmo Action. I was able to test out a couple of the filters. They have the new hot swap magnetic system, which is really cool. First of its kind that I've seen so far, very similar to what you have done with the Osmo Pocket, but now you're also able to do it here with the Action. All you have to do is just switch this out by changing the ND filter. So in this video, I'm going to show you exactly what ND filters do, as well as how I'm able to pick the right one. Also, a bunch of test footage showing the differences with and without an ND filter. Now, before we actually get to the skate park, what I want to do is answer a few questions that I've actually addressed in a bunch of my videos in the past, and that's regarding ND filters. Do I need them? How do I actually pick out the right one? Which is the right ND filter I'm going to need for the Osmo Pocket? So what I want to do right now is to kind of show you, because of the fact that PolarPro has a variety pack, ND4 all the way up to ND64, which one do you need? Well, it's all depending on your weather, and it's depending on the sun and the environment. That's going to determine what strength you're going to need to put onto your Osmo Action. And even right here, while I'm shooting this right now, the sun is in and out of the clouds, which means the sun is always changing. Your circumstance, your lighting is always changing, which means you're going to also need to be able to change with it. And that's the reason why they come out multiple packs as far as the strength of the ND filter goes. So what I'm going to do is just kind of show you exactly how I quickly go about dialing in my filter based on the shutter speed I want to use, as well as the settings I want to use on the Osmo Action. So right now we're in auto mode, and as you can see, everything looks fine. It looks great. The colors look good. But in auto mode on a very bright day like this, your shutter speed is going to be cranked up really high, which means you're going to probably have a shutter speed of 1/1000, 1/2000. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, what the effects are. But if you want to take control over your exposure a little bit more, right now we are in auto, and I'm going to switch that over to manual mode. And ideally in manual mode, if you want to keep your ISO as low as possible, that's always for the best quality. So we'll keep it at ISO 100. And because of the fact that we can't adjust the aperture, it is a fixed 2.8 on this camera. The only thing you can adjust is the ISO and the shutter speed. So right now, if you want to use the 180-degree rule, which basically states that if you want to have more natural motion blur in your video, you're going to want to double your frame rate. So let me walk you through exactly what that means. As you can see here, we are shooting currently at 4K, we'll say 4K at 30 frames a second. Now, if you were to use that rule, which is basically double your frame rate, if your resolution's at 4K and you're shooting at 30 frames a second, what you want to do now is make sure that your settings as far as your shutter speed are going to be double your frame rate. So if my frame rate's 30, I'm going to want my shutter speed at 1/60th of a second, right about there. So that's 1/60th of a second. That means my ISO is at 100, which is the best quality. My shutter speed's at 1/60th. Of course, as you can see in my video, it is way blown out. It's overexposed. Now, this is the reason why you introduce ND filters. So what you want to do is go through a few different samples of ND filters to see what gives you the best exposure. So if I put an ND4 up here, you can see what that starts to look like. And as you can see, so here I'm using an ND4, and as you can see, it's still overexposed. An ND8, and see what that looks like. It's getting a little bit better, but my skies are still blown out. There you go. That's an ND16. I'm just holding it up to it real quick, just to get an idea. As you can see there, my skies are coming back in. And let's try an ND32. I'm just holding it up right here. And there you go. ND32 gives me the best looking image for my situation, for my current situation right now, which is really good. So by the time I got to the skate park, it was a little bit overcast, so I didn't have to use a strong ND filter in order for me to get the right exposure. I was able to use an ND8 with a PL on it. And the thing is, I was actually shooting at 4K at 60 frames a second, because ideally I might want to slow it down later on with all these skaters and bike riders. I might want to slow that down. So I had one Osmo Action with no filter, and then the other Osmo Action with it dialed in with the ND8 filter. Now with no filter on, I had to crank my shutter speed up to 1/1000th of a second to get the proper exposure, but with the ND8, I was able to get 2 times my frame rate at 1/120th of a second. Now here's just some sample footage with no filter on, shooting at 4K at 60 frames a second. In order for me to properly expose it, however, I had to crank my shutter speed up to 1/1000th of a second. Now here with the PolarPro ND8, I'm still shooting at 4K at 60. I'm able to dial it in now 2 times my frame rates to shutter speed of 1/120th. Now once you start looking at the footage at a higher shutter speed, it begins to look a little bit choppier compared to when you're actually shooting it 2 times your frame rate at 120 with the ND filter on. Now just to show you some of the effects of a higher shutter speed versus a lower shutter speed or slower, what I did here is actually took a freeze frame from both shots. On the left is with the high shutter speed at 1/1000th. As you see, it's very sharp, but in video it ends up looking choppy. On the right hand side, we have the 1/120th shutter speed. Slower gives you a little bit sense of movement and motion in the video, which looks a bit more natural. So hopefully with that explanation, you can kind of see a difference here when I show you some of the footage with no filter as well as with footage with the filter. Also with the polarizer, you can see a little bit more contrast in the video. It does bring out some of the clouds a little bit more. Just more footage here to show you some of the side-by-side differences between having no filter and a high shutter speed versus a low one. And just to have a little fun, I had the guys go around the track just to test out the 2 Osmo Actions, one with the filter, one without. Also, how does the stabilization look? Right here on the left, we have no filter, still shooting at 4K at 60 frames a second at shutter speed of 1/1000th, slowed down a couple times in this video to about 50%. So here it is right now with the PolarPro ND8. Same settings, of course, as earlier. Shutter speed at 120, also slowed down right here at 50%. And the footage in this video from the Osmo Action is all straight out of camera. There was no post-processing done with it. So with no filter as well as the PolarPro 8, also shooting in normal mode and not indecent alike. And a huge shout out to these guys for helping me on this video. Their info is also down below in the video description. Now the one thing I was a little bit concerned on as far as these new magnetic filters go is that are they going to stay on in extreme conditions? And I did a bunch of tests here. I was literally tossing it around, hitting the floor a bunch of times, and I can just drop it, you know, I was basically just kind of doing this the whole time just to see if anything were to come off. And of course, nothing actually did when I was testing it. As you can see, I can still pop it off just like that. But when I was playing around with it, I had them on the skateboards over there. I was letting them kind of do whatever they need to do. So it was good to see that even though it's just held on there by these magnets, it didn't come off. Now, of course, if you're taking it in like crazy extreme conditions and you're bike riding in, you know, somewhere where you're gonna be falling a lot, and if this thing were to really, really hit hard, yes, it more than likely will probably pop off. But in normal conditions and normal riding, you know, normal day-to-day things, I think everything worked out fine. Like I said, I never had any issues. This is all one take, and I'm literally just gonna keep tossing it up in the air and seeing what happens to it. It is an action cam, so, you know, these are some of the things that you're gonna deal with. Of course, I'm not gonna throw it on concrete because I don't wanna try to break the camera, but we're good to go. Good to go. So the only way you're able to get that shutter speed down is by introducing ND filters. This one right here is the ND filter from PolarPro. I'll make sure all that information, all these are gonna be linked down below in the video description. So if you guys are interested, make sure you guys check those out. Of course, I'll leave all the information about the filters in that description as well.